What's going on, y'all? Today's guest is Ryan Murphy, president of the Huntsville, Alabama Venue Group, who is currently constructing and designing the beautiful Huntsville, Alabama Amphitheater. Ryan is also their head of amphitheaters and venues, and he's the former director of the St. Augustine Amphitheater. Thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation with the amazing Ryan Murphy.
Live the life you love.
So this is the first video version of the podcast. If it all comes out well, it'll be out on YouTube as well now.
Wow.
You're the pioneer.
Wow. Yeah, it's funny. I was like, should I dress up a certain way? I've neglected shaving. I'm just wearing a cap and whatever shirt I grab. But yeah, I think it's everyone's style lately, so it's apropos.
Well, we're in the music industry, so I think everything's okay. So we have a lot of amazing guests and interesting guests on the podcast all the time, but I have to admit, sometimes preparing for a podcast it's sometimes really tough, like to come up with like really good questions, especially if they have been on a lot of interviews. Like, how do you make the interview better? So sometimes it's going to take me hours to come up with like 10 to 15 questions, and I hope you're ready. I think this is the biggest list of questions I've ever had. I don't know if it's because I know you or I've been to the amphitheater or what, but
both. Yeah. Cool. Ready,
so before we go through your journey and talk about St. Augustine and everything you've done before, give everyone kind of like a preview of what it is you're doing currently, and the project you're currently involved with.
Yeah. I feel really grateful. Sorry. I feel really grateful that even during these times, it's like I'm able to work on such a forward-thinking, amazing project. I'm here in Huntsville, Alabama, and I've been here for coming up on a year, coming up next month, and working with an amazing team. And I work for Venue Group, which is myself, Ben Lovett, who is one of the founding members of, and is obviously still in Mumford & Sons, and runs great venues over in London, and some of the guys from Madison House, Mike Luba and Don Sullivan. We're currently designing and about to go into the construction of an amazingly beautiful, like nothing I've ever seen, amphitheater, 8,000 seat amphitheater here in Huntsville, Alabama. The city of Huntsville has contracted with us to design it, build it, oversee the construction of it, and then we're going to operate it for the next 15, 20 years for sure. And not only that, we get to engage the local music community. A lot of the existing venues, we get to look at helping create a ladder of venues and opportunity for people working in the music industry, but also artists traveling through. So we're going to create what we can, the best ecosystem, musical ecosystem here in Huntsville, Alabama. And it's really amazing. It's a really amazing city leadership, really amazing local community, music community that has gotten behind. I mean, they welcomed me with open arms the moment I got here. It's a really amazing city. And yeah, it was a shock to move from Florida to Alabama. I didn't know what I was getting into until I actually came here and got to know what Huntsville in particular was all about. And it's really exciting. And as of right now, I know a lot of projects are on pause and a lot of things are happening in the world, but the city here believes that the fact that we're working on something that's going to open in late 2021, that's going to bring a lot of joy and inspiration and, just a lot of great stuff to the community. I think that we still are, trudging ahead and really making a go of this project.
That's awesome. That's so exciting. I'll ask you the next question. I'm going to share, so now we're doing video. I'm going to share this cool video real quick. It's like a rendering of the Huntsville Amphitheater. Can you see that on your screen?
I can.
So it's a rendering of it. So like when I look at the website for like the venue group, I see London, Austin, Texas, Brooklyn, New York, and you went over it a little bit just now, but why Huntsville, Alabama?
Well, it's interesting. And it's funny, this rendering's actually, it's pretty old at this point. Meaning that, like, I can't wait for people to see some of the new ones too, but you get the idea that,
so it's the website.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be pretty epically beautiful, and it's pretty awesome. So why Huntsville, Alabama? So I think it was because that this company called Sound Diplomacy, which is based in London.
Mhm.
They work on going into communities, doing a really amazing audit of the music ecosystem, the venues, the support systems, the local artists, and they work with cities, counties, municipalities to kind of help put together a document and to kind of really put on paper.
Oops.
What's that?
Oh, sorry about that. Huntsville, Alabama hat just came on.
But yeah, Alabama and St. Augustine. They it's been pretty amazing. Sound Diplomacy goes in, and Huntsville, Alabama was the first place they went. They did a full music audit, and the results of it I can send to you after this. But if you go to sounddiplomacy.com and you look at it, it's an amazing organization. I have them in St. Johns County and St. Augustine right now as well. I suggested that they go there and work with the community there. They quantify exactly what's been happening there, and then they put together these amazing hundreds of pages of audits and studies and surveys, and they put together this really amazing document that they can then go back to the city or county or whatever cultural leaders and make recommendations on what else they can do to help support. Yeah, there you go, exactly. Sound Diplomacy. So they do a really great job. And so in Huntsville, they started this process, and one of their recommendations that had already been kind of bounced around with the city of Huntsville was the idea of building an amphitheater. And I think, to the city's credit, that they listened to a few people that chimed in saying that, you know, you don't have to look at your normal cookie cutter type shed, you know, as they're referred to in our industry. They, you know, you have a big metal building, then you have a lawn that stretches out, and you maximize the amount of people you can shove in there and beers you can sell. So we really looked at this piece of property, and we looked at going vertical, and we looked at seeing how high we could go up, how much we could squeeze it in. We referenced a lot of the spaces we really loved, whether it be Red Rocks, obviously, Hollywood Bowl, you know, the Greek in Berkeley. A lot of this, since we have the Forest Hills team up in Queens, New York, since we have them as part of our partners on this project, we pull a lot of the design from Forest Hills as well. But really, it harkens back to like the Aspendos in Turkey. And you figured thousands of years ago, when they were building these amphitheaters, they had no amplified sound. So they really figured out, you know, the acoustics of being able to go vertical to really hug it in that horseshoe and that round bowl, and to kind of, you know, be able to get thousands of people in one space and be able to, you know, do these grand events. So yeah, it's a really exciting project. And anyways, to go back to your question, the city of Huntsville entertained the idea of letting us submit a proposal on this amphitheater. And they actually, the city of Huntsville, to their credit, once they started being interested in not just the design that we were looking at, but how we wanted to operate, which is very similar to how I wanted to make sure St. Augustine was always operated, which was as year-round as possible.
Right.
You know, I think, again, with a lot of the sheds and amphitheaters out there and large music venues, you have the 20 to 40 to whatever many major concerts happen a year. Maybe now and then you'll have a special event, but really it's pretty dormant and dark the rest of the year. So for us to have something that was community oriented, it would have as many farmers markets, night markets, graduations, civic events, nonprofit events, small festivals, art festivals, anything that we could do to kind of make it a more community engaged venue. We definitely, that was part of the operational piece, and having that experience in St. Augustine helped. But I told the city leaders in Huntsville, I said, before you really sign up for this, I think you should come and see how it's operating in St. Augustine. And so they flew over, and actually they flew over for opening season of the St. Augustine Amphitheater last year, which that show was actually Alabama, ironically.
Oh, that's funny.
They were able to come and see an Alabama show. And but they got to see the farmers market the next day, and I think Brothers Osborne was loading in. So it was a good, the city got a real taste for like having a really great show opening, you know, the season with Alabama. They went back to their hotels, came the next morning. There was a really vibrant farmers market. There's people doing yoga. There was a band on the front porch playing bluegrass. And it was just a really great, you got the sense that, oh, wow, the community really embraces this. So that was kind of the, that was really it. And then we were off to the races, and yeah. And here,
That's
here
awesome.
I am in Huntsville. Yeah, but extremely, extremely supportive yet curious city leadership that has done a great job of due diligence and like looking into what this all means in the music industry. What it means for us to be operating as an open room, and how
Hmm.
that in the climate of, you know, Live Nation and AEG, and what it means in the market, and our what we're going to be competing with. And so they really didn't just like look at our proposal and kind of go for it. There was, you know, multiple proposals from everyone you can think of, and yeah, they went with ours because I think they did a lot of their homework, to their credit.
It's exciting. I can't wait to see my first show there. I'm
Yes.
sure you're excited about it. And you guys are working on other venues, right? Is that something you told me about before? Is that something that's still in the works?
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. That number fluctuates, but I think mainly looking to help support some of the venues that already exist in
Mm-hmm.
Huntsville, however we can, as well as, you know, I mean, we look at Huntsville, we look at, you know, Muscle Shoals and Sheffield, and that whole Muscle Shoals area, not too far away,
Mm-hmm.
even the corridor from Nashville down to Huntsville. You know, we're a little under 2 hours away from Nashville, so everything in between, you know, we're looking to create that corridor, because as Nashville becomes kind of top heavy and
Mm-hmm.
overloaded, I think a lot of people in the music industry and a lot of artists are looking to find an area that they can go to, and that's going to be hungry. And
Yeah.
yeah, Huntsville's one of them. But yeah, we're definitely looking at that ladder I talked about, whether it be 100 cap venue,
Mm-hmm.
500 cap, 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, 8,000, you know, to create that ladder for the artists. And the industry here is important. And there's already a great performing arts center here called the Von Braun Center. And they just opened a 1,200 cap room, and it's doing great. They just
Yeah.
opened it, but out of the gate with Jason Isbell, Band of Horses, you know,
Nice.
Bone Thugs and Harmony, like, you know, Tig Notaro. They're getting the head and the heart. They're getting some great programming and really helping move the needle and doing a lot of work in the market. So we're kind of all working together at this point to just, I mean, everyone in Huntsville understands that, you know, the rising tide, you
Mm-hmm.
know, floats all ships. So it's exciting.
That's so cool. Guys, excited to see what's going to happen for the Huntsville music scene.
Yeah, it's cool.
Really cool. So before we start recording, we talked a little bit about this. So, you know, whoever's listening to this in the future that may not even experience this current virus outbreak that we're going through, the COVID-19 coronavirus, all industries, but especially the music industry, has been really impacted. I mean, thousands of shows have been canceled. Thousands of people are out of work, especially people that make their money on the road. How, since you guys are mostly in the, I guess, construction and planning phase, how has this affected you guys?
So yeah, for us here in Huntsville, and also you know, the project we have in Austin, and some of the development and design projects, you know, moving forward, and we're doing fine, thankfully. But some of the team we have in London, and just having opened a really great new whole development that includes a live music venue, and their other live music venue and developments, it's having to put a pause and kind of look at furloughing some of the workers, and like kind of doing everything we can to keep the team together. It's really been eye-opening. I think when we first hit this, you know, a month ago,
Mm-hmm.
we all started scratching our heads over this. It was like, well, let's postpone some of the shows maybe a month and see how this goes, or 2 months. And now it's interesting, because we're looking to open our amphitheater here in Huntsville in late 2021.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be the window that all the major artists and a lot of people are kind of hitting a reset and going, maybe 2020 is a wash. Maybe, you know, maybe 2021 is our safest bet. And so everyone's kind of shifted. I think you can't call a major venue right now to book a show and place a hold. Like, you're not going to see like 30 other holds in front of you.
Right.
I think everyone's going to traffic jam pretty quickly. So to be opening a new venue in 21, whether it be large or small, I think we're actually in a great place with that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really curious what this does to our industry. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it all rolls out. I mean, we're never going to be the same after this, right?
No, absolutely
in every single way. I think the way we engage each other, and the way what's coming out of the arts and the creativity, and what's coming out of the people taking the time to be able to pause and recalibrate, has been a really beautiful thing in a lot of ways, despite the scariness of everything going on. But I think for us, I mean, you know as well as I do, it's like music is the lifeblood,
Right.
and so much of music being the lifeblood is the live music experience. And so I think there's going to be ways we adapt. I think there's ways that yeah, it's going to be really interesting. It's going to be an interesting, soft way to open up, to ramp back up to how do we get 8,000 people in one space and
Right.
not 100 people in one space and not
Yeah.
feel totally paranoid. You know, reading articles right out of the gate from Billboard or any of these, you know, venues now and stuff that talks about all the technology to make sure everything's touchless. You know, it's like, yeah, whatever, every transaction you have, you're not having to touch anything.
Right.
But the proximity of putting so many people together, yeah, it's like, but I mean, it's how you and I well know, it's how every artist in the world is able to make a living right now. So I think that's as promoters and as venue operators and people in the music industry on this side, it's one thing. And then being an artist and having to figure out, it's going to be interesting. I think, we got little voices in the background.
I might have little voices too.
But I think I think Ben and I were talking the other day, or he was talking about how it's interesting how even looking at China as they're coming out of a lot of elements of this pandemic, that the spike in digital music and online streaming and people discovering new music, that I think is an interesting phenomenon, because as we all sit in our houses and in our spaces, our consumption is changed in a different way. And we've hit this point where it's like, I can only listen to the same albums I've been listening to for years anyways. And
Right.
I'm always hungry for new music, but I think the amount of people that all of a sudden I'm talking to who are, hey, do you have recommendations? Or, hey, send me your top 10 records I should be listening to now, or even podcasts, or, you know, it's like, so the consumption's changing in a different way because people have changed their, you know, their time. So
Yeah.
all being said, I think we're going to be all right. I don't know what it looks like, and it's odd designing a space. Like, you bring up that rendering and it looks amazing with you know, that 8,000 people shoved into one spot. That right now, as you and I are talking in this moment, is probably the scariest thing to look at. You know?
Yeah. For
So,
sure.
unless
I always
it's gloves and face masks, or, you know, it's like, yeah, what an interesting thing.
I always thought for promoters and venues, and even for artists, like, to solely like make the majority of your revenue, almost all your revenue, just on like live events, it's kind of a scary business model, right? Because right now we're kind of learning what happens when we can't have live events. The entire revenue stream goes away. Do you foresee any changes to like the current way that venues and promoters are doing business, and like looking at other revenue streams? Like, what do you feel like might be changing, or is there anything that you're planning on doing differently because of this?
Well, I mean, I think in general we're going to try to lean towards operating differently anyways. I think the beauty of being able to be in this project with someone like Ben Lovett, who gives the perspective of touring, you know, being in a touring band for a better part of the decade with Mumford & Sons and seeing things on multiple scales, is he's approaching it from the artist perspective, you know, and I'm approaching it from the venue operator side. And it's like, yeah, I mean, as the venue operator, what is my number one source of revenue? It's beer sales.
Right.
Plain and simple, right? So it's like, we're already heading towards a point where the ticket sales didn't matter to the promoter or the venue. Like, all that money was having to roll to the artist. So you need the bodies there to buy the tickets to see the band, and then we need the bodies there to drink the beer.
Right.
That's it. I mean, it's kind of a simple equation. So everyone's, especially with the big players, you know, especially like Live Nation and AG and some of the bigger dogs in the world, they have to kind of sit down and hash this out and kind of, I think we all have to come together. And I know that's happening, but knowing that, like, well, shit, man, like, we're all in this, whether we win or lose. And how we come together now is really going to be a telltale sign of how we survive. And I think I think luckily the artists are driving a lot of the conversation, because a lot
Mhm.
of the artists are saying, hey, promoters, venues, agents, management, everybody, despite your differences or despite history or anything else, can we all get on the same page and talk about what the future of this looks like? I mean,
Yeah.
I think there's elements of things we've done that just disappear forever. I think there's ways that we treat revenue streams that change forever. I think I don't think that's a bad thing.
Mm.
I think it's gotten so whittled and odd to where the economics of it get just outweigh a lot of times the experience. And
Mhm.
you and I have I think we've even talked about it, but it's like you get so worried about certain aspects of like how many beers are going to be sold. At the end of the day, it's like, I mean, that's what a weird business to be in if you're just counting the number of beers to be sold. But yeah, so I think I think it's a big reset. It's a big recalibration. And I think everyone's starting to talk. From what again, being able to have Ben as one of my partners in this, he gets a good perspective of being able to talk to a lot of people globally. So this is a
Mhm.
global conversation, I mean, the things that are happening in London. And so, yeah, it's, yeah, I don't know, man. It'll be really interesting to see how this
Yeah.
changes.
Yeah. I hope it's all for the better. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to go a little bit through your journey. Kind of start a little bit from the beginning, and then as we walk through your journey, I'm gonna ask some like tangent questions here and there to for like learning lessons and stuff for the listeners. But I didn't know until I read that article on the Folio Weekly that you grew up in Daytona Beach, Florida. Like, were you born there, and what was it like growing up in Daytona Beach?
Yeah. I like to talk about it because I think it's an important piece of being in Daytona and having nothing but a cultural wasteland to kind of grow up around and to kind of make it. But I was actually born in Tallahassee, and
Okay.
then my parents were in Gainesville for a bit as a going to college, and then went to Daytona for a bit, and then went to upstate New York for my childhood, which was absolutely dreamy. Grew up in the Catskills,
Awesome.
farms and mountains and rivers, and just had the most idyllic like childhood. And then at the tender, sensitive age of being like seventh grader, got ripped out of the beauty of the Catskills and shoved into Daytona Beach, Florida. My dad was working for PBS, and the PBS station in Daytona was hiring, and so we went there. And yeah, it was a culture shock for this little farm boy. And yeah, Daytona is just it's a horrific place. I don't really know. I mean, I think there's elements of it that are charming and trying. It's like you got the Peabody, and you got some cool spaces there that I can remember from a kid. Like I went with my grandma and saw cats at the Peabody, and that was really exciting. But yeah, so I used to write for the high school newspaper,
Mhm.
and I was charged with doing like exposés, and like I would do an expose on what are these kids doing going out mudding? What is mudding all about? Or what is it? So that was one of the things that I was like an investigative journalist. But then I found this recently, to go back to your question. I found a copy of one of the little like high school newspapers, and there was a front page article, and it was an opinion piece by me talking about what a cultural wasteland Daytona is, and it had like no culture, and it doesn't support the arts. And I read it, I was like, right on. I didn't remember it at all. But so basically around like 14, 15, I started a band with some friends, and we were influenced by all the the usual suspects with the in the punk rock realm, and really inspired us, especially a lot of stuff coming out of DC, and kind of
Mhm.
just this DIY aesthetic that you could just create your own scene. And so being in Daytona where there was no scene, I thought that was really cool because it kind of forced me to do something about it.
Yeah.
And so my friends and I were like, well, we're in a band, and we have some other friends who are in bands, and I mean, we're terrible, but at the
Mhm.
same time, we don't get a chance to go see shows or play any of these venues in Daytona because they're all 18 and up, or they're
Right.
just, they're just like
Biker
terrible shows.
bars.
And yeah, biker bars and everything else. And so I had this idea that I was gonna like throw a festival or do a show or something. So I told my dad, if he could drive me, it was like a Saturday, if he could just drive me along A1A, and I'd pop into every hotel and ask if they had like a conference room or a bigger room I could rent, I would throw a concert.
That's
And,
awesome.
I hit about like 10 or 12, and they're like, kid, get out of here. And I finally got to the Ramada, and right on the beach. And the woman at the desk was like, sure. And I was like, well, how much is it? And she's like, it's $100 if you want to rent it for the day. And I said, okay. And she's like, what day do you want? And I just randomly picked a Saturday, like a month later. And I was like, I'll be right back. And I went and opened like a checking account with my dad, put money in it, and then went, wrote a check, and held the conference room.
That's awesome.
And a month later, I had a big concert, and I invited bands from Gainesville, St. Augustine, because St. Augustine had a really cool little scene going on, bands from Daytona, and just anything I like, any connections I could make at that time, pre-internet. But yeah, I put a flyer in a record store and stuff. And so I had like a little festival with like 10 bands, and we just went all day. Yeah, hundreds of kids showed up, and I pulled it off. But that was like, yeah, that was my first like festival show, like whatever. And then, yeah, that was cool.
Right out of the gate, right with the festival. Go all out. It's awesome.
I remember, yeah, the people that ran the Ramada would come in now and then and open the door and be like, what is this? And like shut the door. They, to their credit, they didn't shut us down, or yeah.
They didn't complain about the sound, or guests didn't complain. That's awesome. So cool.
Shocking. Yeah,
Well,
yeah, it's so funny because I look back at the flyer, and even like bands like Hot Water Music and a lot of bands I went on to do like really great stuff.
That's
and still
awesome.
have great careers. They played, but they were all like 17 at the time.
Right. Yeah, I saw the new announcement for the new fest lineup, and I saw they were on there. That's pretty cool. What was your playing in bands experience like? Did you tour? Like, how far did it go?
Well, yeah. So after that show, really a lot of the shows we would play were in St. Augustine. There's one of the most formative things that happened to me beyond just the like making these connections was there was an amazing record store called Fuse Records in St. Augustine, Florida. Mm-hmm. And a little hole in the wall right downtown in the historic downtown district. But that was one of those record stores I went early 90s, went there, and I would roll in and be like, talk to the guy that ran the record store and be looking, and I'd come up with a record, and I don't even remember what it would be, but it would be one of your, something typical. And he'd go, oh, if you like, if you like this, whatever record, I bet you No Effects or whatever. He's like, I bet you'd really like Jawbreaker. Let me turn you on to, he got a little more obscure with the bands he was picking. And he would, every time I would come back every weekend, I'd go back to Fuse, he'd have mixtapes waiting for me. And it would mix not only like great bands that I ended up like Bikini Kill and Jawbreaker and all these amazing punk bands, but he would include local bands out of Gainesville, and it just blew my mind because all of a sudden here I was listening to like a Jawbreaker song and went right into like a Radon song who was from Gainesville, and it blew my mind. And so that got me to really discover more that was happening in Gainesville. And I think one of the biggest things at the time was the fact that I got a show, our band got a show in Gainesville at the Hardback Cafe. And No Idea Records, like they helped the guy Var who ran No Idea Records help put it on, and I was like, man, I felt like we had made it at that point. And it was really cool. We all traveled up from Daytona. But so as soon as I graduated high school and I was able to move, I moved to Gainesville for college, but mainly for the music scene. And
your first job was with No Idea Records, right? So your first like industry job.
Yeah, first industry job, but already kind of helping out at venues and doing stuff. But yeah, working at No Idea Records eventually for, I think like almost 13 years. I was there a long time. Huh. But Gainesville was great because, the first house I moved into, there was like 8 other people living at. I'm sure rent was like $30 or $40 a month. And we could do shows there. And not only that, it was one of these places where if I wasn't in school, if it was spring break or summer, I could tour in a band and not worry about rent or anything and coming back. And Gainesville is a great place to have a job if you're in a touring band because they're pretty relaxed with you disappearing for a month and coming back to your bartending, waiting, dishwashing, whatever job. So Gainesville was a sweet spot for that. And so right after moving to Gainesville, I started touring a ton, and toured in bands for the next however many years, 15, 20 years. But yeah, toured the US a ton, went to Europe a bunch. Yeah, just really went for it for a while. And it was great having a job at No Idea Records, also very supportive. Not only was putting out the records of some of the bands I was in, but helping with the tour support. And, I could work at the record label. And then when I was on tour, knowing that I could come back and just pick my job back up. And yeah, but working at the same time, still going to school and working at various venues and restaurants and bars in Gainesville.
That's cool. I noticed, so you've your school journey was like a different direction than what your, I guess, career you ended up in being. But like I was a pre-med at UCF. I was planning on medical school. I was literally studying for the MCAT and going through organic chemistry and biochemistry. And then life put on my first concert and everything changed, right? And you graduated from University of Florida with a master's degree in English as a second language, which is awesome. Like, was that kind of your backup plan? Did you plan on going to that career? Like, what changed?
Yeah, I mean, it's, so I think early on I did a lot of traveling through parts of Mexico, went to Guatemala, Belize. I was spending a lot of time in Central America. I wanted to spend as much time down there. I really loved it down there. I loved the people. I loved getting to know a lot of the people that were migrating from Central America and actually landing in, parts of the US, especially right outside of like Gainesville and Daytona. One of the things that living in Daytona, my dad took me to early on was this, Pearson, Florida, which is right outside of Daytona. It's a huge fern. They grow ferns, like for ornamental ferns and for flowers and stuff. Huge migrant farm worker community out there. And with the huge migrant farm worker community comes a lot of great, tiendas and restaurants. And so as a young kid, my dad brought me there, and it was like, whoa, I can have some of the most amazing, authentic Mexican food 20 minutes outside of Daytona. Who are these people? Where do they come from? Yeah. What is their life all about? That kind of sparked an interest early on. So in Gainesville, after having traveled, through a lot of Central America, just being aware that there is a very invisible yet large and prominent migrant farm worker community all around the agricultural corridor surrounding Gainesville. So yeah, I became very involved with that and ended up becoming very passionate about that being my master's, and getting to, English as a second language and working with a lot of these migrant farm worker communities, especially their children. My focus was literacy programs with their children.
Awesome. That's really cool. I noticed also in an article in Folio while you were in Gainesville, you at least mentioned in there you started growing a big passion for local businesses. Is that something that really cultivated while you were there, or did you always have where does that passion come from?
I think it's just that sense of community. If I go back to, I think, what really kicked it all off is just my sense of like, I think early punk rock, especially coming out of Washington, D.C. in the 80s, and, whether it be Minor Threat, Fugazi, like especially that band Fugazi, I think politically, the way they treat community, the way they treat how they run their label, their band, and everything it felt really empowering. And again, being in Daytona, having no sense of like a real like rich community and like really great local businesses. And there was actually a great bookstore and record store, and there were some great things there. But I think the idea that I could go somewhere and I could create a network of local businesses, local nonprofits, people really just doing it themselves independently and really having a passion for, if someone opened a record store, it's because they love records. If people opened, a taco spot, it's because they have a love for making tacos and being creative. And, it's, I think is really being heavily involved with a lot of the people that are passionate about local business and trying to make sure that's maintained,
Mm-hmm. So like, you're really great, like networker, like building relationships with local businesses, local government leaders, other artists and promoters, like all kinds of people from all different walks of life. Do you have any, I guess, kind of tips or advice on how to build your network, but obviously build genuine relationships, like real relationships? So what advice would you give to someone that's a student right now listening to this on on networking and building genuine relationships?
I think you got to be. I think you got to be able to be open to a lot of different people and their ideas. You know, I'm very passionate and steadfast in my beliefs, but I don't let that interfere with the ability to speak to someone. You know, and I think existing in the South and being in the South for so long, there's such a. I mean, Florida's such a quagmire of opinions and culture and politics and whatever people, lizard people, and then like the South, which, you know, North Florida feels like the South. There's a big, you know, there's a good old boy network. There's still a lot of carryover that's just uncomfortable. There's a lot of dynamics and paradigms you got to kind of work through. I think being able to be patient and work through them and work with people as people. So I think instead of approaching institutions as if they're institutions, you find the people within those institutions that you can have a heart-to-heart with. I think most of the time, for better for worse, I've learned that if I'm sitting down with coffee for the first time with someone, I kind of lay it on the line as far as like who I am and what I do. And, you know, I think early on I kind of held back and kind of tiptoed to make sure I wouldn't offend anybody or just, you know, kind of, I don't like alienating anyone, but I think the more you're open, even if someone doesn't disagree with you about a certain thing, the fact that you're kind of sharing it and putting it out there in a way that seems genuine and welcoming, I think it's important. So again, yeah, government, it's just a monolith, right? And so like you can, like, having been a county director for 10 years, it's like, you know, I could go around St. Johns County, the community people going, yeah, the goddamn county's doing this and the county's doing this. And I could always go, hey, I'm the county. Do you want to talk to me about this? Because I'm actually a director at the county level, and maybe there's something I could do to help change this. And just because I'm the director of cultural events doesn't mean I can't go over to parks and recreation or the libraries and help work with those directors. So I think just, yeah. So I'm a person that was part of an institution that had, you know, that would gladly sit down and talk to someone if they had some ideas or complaints. And I think you run into so many people that just kind of shut it down, or the people that say, don't engage or don't. I mean, for better, for worse, I kind of listen and respond to everyone. I think, you know, even on social media, I think, you know, I would just obsessively look through the Amphitheater Facebook pages and say an Augustine or this or that. I just, you know, I feel like I have to be a real voice to people when so again, my advice would be find the people within the institutions and in the neighborhoods and just, you know, you start creating network. We have a lot more in common than we don't.
That's really good advice. I love that. So we went a little bit through your background, your history in music, playing in shows. I guess before I get to this question, you mentioned, I mean, mentioned it, but you mentioned something about put on shows at your house. Tell me about that before I go to this question I was about to jump to. So tell me about put on house shows.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably the greatest shows I've ever seen were either in someone's house or me playing someone's house or me throwing a show at my house. It's just I mean, that's just the ultimate to me. You know, you from someone who can curate something like that, it's exciting because you have a lot of control, whether or the cops come and shut it down. But it still feels pretty guerrilla. You know, it still feels it's exciting. I think you break boundaries. I think the difference between if you grow up and you see like you go and see ZZ Top on stage in this arena and you're, you know, they look this big on stage and you're, you know, you're a kid or whatever band, Radiohead, whatever.
Right.
The idea that like you could be that, or there's something between you and that person there's no real connection made.
Right.
When you have a house show, and granted ZZ Top and Radiohead aren't playing house shows, but when you have a house show, at least anymore, when you have a house show, you can literally like reach out and touch the person who's performing and vice versa. You've broken all walls, you know, you've broken all barriers. And so I think that was important to me. I think I remember seeing house shows and being able to look at a band and go, man, this band is incredible. I could do this, not be incredible, but I could make a big deal. I could try to at least, I could travel the country and play people's houses. So a lot of that early touring had a lot to do with people playing warehouse shows and playing people's houses and carports and parking lots of like weird ass Mexican restaurants. And, it's like, yeah, that's just a very DIY, just to embrace that part of it. You just have a real control over it. And I think that carries over to the way I really like to operate too. I think being able, I think being a control freak is part of it, but also just the DIY nature of like, I want every aspect of the people's experience, the band's experience. That's a big part. It's not just the customer experience of like, I hope everyone here at the concert's having a great time.
Right.
I really want the working crew, the stagehands. I want the truck drivers. I want the band that's on stage and all their, production people and tour crew. I want them to have a great day and have a great experience. And that comes from, I think, when you do it at your house, you're the host.
Right. Yeah.
So if I kind of extrapolate that and say, when I was doing house shows, this is the way I acted. When I reel back and I have a 4,000 seat amphitheater in St. Augustine, I'm treating it the same way. It's my house, and I want you to feel like you stepped into my house and I'm going to take care of you for the evening.
Yeah, and that's how it should be. I've once heard a quote that as a promoter, you're the host of two parties. You're the host of the party backstage and a host of the party that's, the people coming to watch a show. And it's your job if you care about your job, to make sure that both parties are having a good time. I think that's the key to having a successful venue.
Yeah, man, for sure.
Tell me, real quick before I jump to the next question I was going to ask, what would a tour look like? Would it be a mixture of house shows, parking lot shows, and traditional venues? What would a tour look like for you back then? And this is with punk bands, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think early on, we would reject the traditional venue. I think to us, it's like, unless it was a cool punk venue, but I think playing someone's house or playing someone's warehouse or a record store, it was way cooler and way more exciting and way more in line with what we were trying to achieve. I think all of a sudden being on a big stage and having lights and an actual PA system, I think it made us feel more vulnerable somehow. But yeah, and it's like, the whole emphasis of what we were trying to do at the time, and a lot of what I still believe in, you're trying to break down a lot of those barriers, and you're trying to break up that rock and roll dynamic of it doesn't have to be just this artist on a stage and spotlights and this ocean of people watching. I think so. That was exciting. Granted, no one more than 20, 30 people were going to come see us anyway. So if you do it, and so the reality of it is if we were at a venue and 20 people showed up, or 10 people showed up, you feel kind of crappy. You don't, but if it's a big venue, you feel bad for the venue. And then the venue's like, why did we book these guys? Right. And but if you're playing someone's house and there's 10 people, 20 people there, it feels like, wow, man, this is awesome.
Yeah.
So, and I think even the economics of playing a house show are a little better when you can pass the hat around. Mm-hmm. I think you can fill your tank of gas and buy some peanut butter and tortillas, on the way out to eat the next day. And most of the time when you're playing house shows or record stores, or you have some of these people in a network, they're taking care of you. They're cooking you dinner. You can stay at their house. You're not having to get a hotel. You don't get that a lot of time, especially in that level with venues, I think,
yeah. And the reason I asked this, because I had a guest on a podcast once, Shannon Curtis, who wrote a book on how she made money doing house shows. And most people relate house shows to singer-songwriters and acoustic. And I always try to tell and teach artists, no, you can be a punk band, you can be a metal band, you can be a hip-hop artist, a DJ. And Steve Aoki started with doing house shows. So it doesn't matter what genre, you can go on the road, make a living, pay your bills, and build a fan base, and probably even a tighter, stronger fan base by playing in people's houses.
So funny, man, because Steve Aoki is his old band used to play with our band all the time in California, and he ran a record label called Dim Mak. That Steve Aoki comes from the same world I come from in that way. It was like, yeah, that DIY, so of course, yeah. You have Diplo's the same way, but you have Steve Aoki, and you have these artists who are like, yeah, that's the world they came from, Diplo was at a bunch of the shows in Daytona. that, you know, I was putting on, him and his skater crew that we were rivals with. It's just a funny, you know, it's like you can connect these dots and kind of
Mhm.
see, but yeah, there's amazing, amazing hip hop shows happening here in Huntsville that are happening in people's backyards and houses.
That's
And it's
awesome.
probably one of the most vibrant, energetic, and exciting things happening in Huntsville right now are the whole north side of Huntsville is having some of the most amazing hip hop shows. And
Yeah,
it's in people's backyards and in their houses. And it's, yeah, it's pretty wild.
that's awesome. I can't wait to share this with people and have them maybe open up the idea to play in people's houses more than trying to just hunt venues down for hours and hours and not get an email response.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So the question I was going to ask before we went to the house shows is we went through your background a little bit, your history in the music industry up to that point. And the next question I want to ask is about the poster you have on the back of the wall, Harvest of Hope Festival. That's when you and I first met. That's when I was doing Rock for Hunger, which was really, really tiny compared to Harvest of Hope. But I was so impressed and inspired by what you were doing with that festival, and I just had to come meet you. Tell me, I guess, about that festival and how you guys pulled this festival off.
Yeah. I don't know if we pulled it off, but it was fun. It's probably that. Yeah, it was probably one of the greatest things I feel like I was able to be part of. But yeah, we did meet back then. So it goes back to me getting my master's in English as a second language. So like I was saying, I was starting to work with. I'd worked so long being in a band and working at a record label and putting on shows and stuff, and that was great. But I was wanting to make a shift, and hence getting my master's. And one of the programs I put together was Libros de Familia, which was the literacy program working with the migrant farm worker community and their children outside of Alachua County. And one of the funding sources for that program was an organization, an amazing organization called Harvest of Hope. And Harvest of Hope was this guy, Phil Kellerman. He ran it on his own, and it was all migrant farm worker support, whether it be medical, whether it be, you know, housing, any of the needs they had. You know, he just was there, an extremely amazing person, still doing amazing work. But so he was funding this program, and as we were doing a lot of work together, we became friends. And he said, Ryan, you know, I'm just always looking to do fundraising if you have any ideas, this or that. And I was like, you know, man, I bet you some of these bands that I'm friends with and some of these people I'm working with would love to throw just a benefit concert. Like, let's just throw a benefit concert.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first people I pitched it to was Against Me, who good friends and touring mates and still great friends to this day. I said, hey, listen, I know you care a lot about same things. We all come from the same. Oh, there it is. We all come from we all come from the same. Look at them. We all come from the same background and everything. And I have this organization I'm working with. Would you be willing to do a benefit for them? And they said, absolutely. You know, they didn't hesitate. They were actually going to be in Chicago around the time I want to do a benefit. And they said, I tell you what, it's going to be around Thanksgiving. Let's do a benefit. And the benefit we do, we'll do acoustic, and all the money will go. It will be a special show, and all the money will go to Harvest of Hope. And so they raised, I think it was around $30,000 they raised in one show just to go straight to the organization, and it blew everyone's mind. You know, it was great. Everyone loved it. Big love fest. People got exposed to the work that Harvest of Hope was doing. So after that, I was like, okay, well, let's not stop here. Let's start booking shows in Gainesville, St. Augustine, elsewhere. So I called my friend Ryan Detra over in St. Augustine, who I knew from Cafe 11. My band had played the place he ran with his family called Cafe 11 by the beach, which was fundamental in creating a really great scene in St. Augustine. So I called Ryan and I said, hey, Ryan, I want to do a show in St. Augustine. I'd love to do it at Cafe 11. It's going to be, you know, a benefit for this organization. And he said, hey, Ryan, well, I tell you what, I just, you know, I started working for the county recently. We're actually taking over, you know, we have the amphitheater here and we're taking over these fairgrounds. Why don't we do a multiple day festival? And we can do, you can pull the resources and all the people you work on at the fest in Florida, in Gainesville, and I'll kind of use some of my connections, and we'll just do this massive indie, punk, hip hop, rock, folk. We'll just do this amazing 3-day festival, and there can be camping and blah, 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 and all that money. So I kind of went, shit, man, I like there's a lot more than just doing it. Yeah, okay, let's do it. So it kind of was born out of that. And I, called everyone I know, Tony Weinbender, who runs the fest. And I said, hey, Tony, we got to do this. And, I got everyone from Tampa, Orlando. Like I just started pulling people and bands from all over Florida to really get behind this. And yeah, in 2009, as it says right there on the flyer, that was the first one. And yeah, the National and Bad Brains and Girl Talk. And yeah, it was pretty wild. Just kind of came out of the gate, and yeah, it was really interesting.
It was a cool festival for sure. Is that how the relationship between you and St. Johns County, where St. Augustine Amphitheaters, is that how that started?
Yeah, 100%. So that one, we had that festival. It didn't go well financially. So the plan, we were kind of a little immature in some of the aspects of what we were putting together. And so I think I convinced them, for better for worse, I said, I know we lost a lot of money on this one. Let's put that on the back burner and let's have another one. And not only is that going to help get us out of being in arrears, but it'll help actually make money for the foundation, which was the whole point. So we gave it another chance, and that second chance again didn't hit the mark, and so we eventually had to squash it. But around that second festival, getting to know the crew pretty well over in St. Augustine, they said, there's a position opening up and to work with this crew, and you'd be working at the amphitheater. You just move over from Gainesville. And I think it was timed right in the way. I said, you know what, Gainesville's been great to me. I've been great to Gainesville, but time to step away. And yeah, I stepped over to St. Augustine, and that was in 2010. And yeah.
What was the state of the amphitheater like when you first started? Like, what kind of shows were you doing? And yeah, tell me about how it was when you first found it.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. Some of the same crew is still there, especially Gabe Pelletier and Liz Glasgow, and there's some people there that have been there for a while from this beginning. But Ryan Detra, who I was friends with, he was running it, and he was, I mean, to his credit, he was pretty aggressive in getting that place off the ground. Like they had in like 2007, 2008, they had taken the amphitheater in St. Augustine and taken it from this old coquina quarry looking amphitheater with wood benches and no real stage and very rudimentary, where they used to host the state play. They did a $9 million transformation and did the tent and the stage and the back of house and all the new seating and box office, all that. So when they came out of the gate, they really didn't know what to do with it. They had some smaller events and festivals, Gamble Rogers festivals there. They had like Little Richard came and played, and they had some interesting events out of the gate. But when I came on board, Ryan was already working with like AG and Red Mountain and some local promoters to do some really heavy hitting shows. So around 2009 into 2010, when I stepped in, we had cracked open the ability to start making the mark for this being a legitimate amphitheater to be seen by the music industry as somewhere you could actually route. So I will say, in a nutshell, in those days, there was a lot of picking up the phone to agents, promoters, management, whomever, saying, you've never heard of us. Here's some pictures. Here's this or that. Please come play our venue. There was a lot of, to where you fast forward 6, 8 years, 10 years, whatever, a handful of years later, it's like the phone's ringing off the hook and us picking up and saying, I'm sorry, we don't have dates available. So it was a quick push in the beginning. Ryan left the amphitheater shortly after I got there, and I kind of took the helm around 2011. I kind of took it over, and yeah, I kind of just went for it for the better part of the next 10 years. But it's like you were saying, it's all about relationships, I great relationships with the AED office, and some of the greatest people I've worked with, work there. And it's like the same with Live Nation and Jim Maloney over at the House of Blues in Orlando, and a lot of the independent promoters coming out of Northeast Florida. And yeah, we just very passionate about being hands-on and how we curate it. And I think in the beginning, I was really just looking to get as many like heavy-hitting acts out of the gate. And then towards the back end of the last decade, it was nice to be able to concentrate on being able to get just a lot of the stuff, a lot of the bands I like, because as you well know, I started creating stages around the amphitheater, not just the main stage, the front porch stage, the backyard stage. I started booking a lot of the bands that I wanted to see.
That's awesome. I always refer to St. Augustine Amphitheater as like a Disney for concerts. I mean, really from the backstage experience to front of house, like working shows there to having come seen shows there. It's such an amazing experience.
Yeah.
What was it that made, was it something that you've changed and brought to the venue? Like how did it become such a great experience where, like, I mean, people love working there. I mean, anyone from the box office to production to volunteers to whatever, and people really just enjoy working there, and then the experience is so great, which makes it so magical. Like, what was it that you brought to the amphitheater to kind of cultivate that culture?
I mean, I think it's just like, I think a lot of the ideas of what we've been discussing, I think it's all about approach. I think you rewind 10 years ago when I first started there, if you were to talk to people in the industry, our industry, promoters, management, venue operators, very sour, calloused. I mean, such a very typical, boring way to approach things. There wasn't a lot of emphasis put on the artist experience. You know, I think you have to go all the way back to like Bill Graham and really like talk about, I mean, Bill Graham was the one who kind of really helped change things. And I think just so artist centric. And I think what I brought was, I think a sense of culture, meaning like the culture of the staff and how we operated. We felt like a family, you know, we treated people like family. And I think that, I think I instilled a sense of like what I believed in pretty early on. Like I said, as if we were putting on a house show together. And I think really putting attention to the artist's needs. I think you know this, but not a lot of people know, like, being a touring artist is a terrible lifestyle for the most part. You know, if you have family, you're not seeing your family, or they're on the road and it's hard. Mm-hmm. It's not healthy. It's not fun. It's really boring. There's a lot of downtime where you're staring at the walls of a bus or a screen, or, you know, you're pulling your hair out over stuff. But it's like, if we could create in St. Augustine like an oasis, like when the artists are, the whole thing was the first people you see in the morning are the truck drivers, right? Mm-hmm. If you open those rolling doors, if they smell bacon and coffee and, you know, bagels coming from the end of the hallway, they go, oh, you know, they're, you know what I'm saying? And the artists are coming in and the artist management are coming in. And then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, we know we got Sublime tonight. We know those guys want to get on a little ATV with surfboards and a cooler and go to the beach or whatever. Let's send them off to the beach. They're going to have a blast. They love St. Augustine. They think it's the coolest place ever. And then the management and the working crew are like, Ryan and crew, thank you so much for getting the artists out of our hair for the day while we work. The artists aren't just sitting in their buses. I mean, you know, when we have John Legend, he likes to bring the family over to the alligator farm. And, you know, there's like ZZ Top loves to to go to the lighthouse because, you know, they do ghost tours of the lighthouse. And so there's just getting to know artists and treating them well. And the whole point was to get the artists to remember St. Augustine. So when they're looking at their tour itinerary, there's so many artists we know that are just like, I don't know where I am tonight. You know, I'm in Omaha, or I'm in this. If you stand out, I mean, the whole point of having a nice little area like a garden, and it's like when the Avett Brothers play in St. Augustine, it's like you walk in and you look over at the garden and two of them are there playing guitar and just swinging in hammocks and shooting the shit and like just having a great time, and they feel like they're on vacation and they're just treated well. And so we pay a lot of attention to the food and the hospitality. And so a lot of that gets lost when you're crunching numbers, and it's hard not to crunch numbers when you're the promoter or you're the operator. But if you can come to an understanding, I think I came to a great understanding with all my working partners that, like, hey man, at the end of the day, we could argue over $500, but the artists had a really great time. Mm-hmm. They played their asses off and had a blast. Therefore, the crowd had a great time. Therefore, the crowd probably drank more and had a great time. I mean, in the end, you're probably making more money by spending a little bit of money just to treat people well. I mean, to me, that's become common knowledge, but that wasn't the case, you know, for a while. So there's a shift, you know, and again, I'm county government. That, you know, it's county, the staff that works in St. Augustine are all county government. So you got to take the box and framework of being in the county government, put that to the side, then me in the music industry with a lot of the framework and trappings that has your head down looking at spreadsheets.
Yeah.
You got to take both of those out and be like, ultimately, we're just trying to throw a big, great party and experience for some people. We want everyone to have a great time.
Yeah, and that makes a big difference, and that's why artists are requesting to come play the St. Augustine Amphitheater now. It's like one of the main choices of playing in Florida, or even the Southeast now. Until the Huntsville Amphitheater comes around.
Right.
What does your hiring and recruitment process look like, and maybe like the way you train employees? Like, how do you make sure that when new people join the team, that culture stays intact?
I think getting a good sense of the ability to find the people that kind of understand it or are hungry to understand it. And there's people that get it and people that don't.
Right.
I think in Huntsville, it's going to be a really unique experience of, I think I'm going to be able to pull industry wide to get some really great people to come to Huntsville. So, I mean, I'm a good example of, I got plucked from St. Augustine, Florida, where I had pretty much created a really great thing for myself and my family and the community. And, you know, I was convinced enough by my now partners to just totally get up and leave everything behind and plant myself in Huntsville for the next 10 to 20 years, if not forever. And I think getting people to Huntsville, especially the industry people, they get here and they go, wow, this has a nice quality of life. And so what we're building, we get to be vocal about what we're building. I think people are attracted to that. People are like, oh, Ryan and Ben and Sully and Luber, those guys are building something really unique over in Huntsville. I get it. I want to be part of it. You know, we've already had some great calls from some people. I mean, unfortunately, what's happening in our industry right now, there's a lot of people just sitting, trying to figure out what they're going to do with their lives. There's some major players and some heavy hitters that we all respect and look up to that have all of a sudden found themselves. I mean, agents, management, promoters, venue operators, all of a sudden are going to be without a job. So I think, the ability to kind of reach broadly is going to be great. Unfortunately, a great side effect of, fortunate for me, but yeah.
All right. So I don't mean to skip over Ponte Vedra Concert Hall, but just in interest for time, again, just for the audience, like Ponte Vedra Concert Hall is another venue that you guys ran. That is a 900 cap room, just right between St. Augustine and Jacksonville. But for both venues, you guys did a really great job, like with your volunteer program. Like even for like a smaller venue, like usually when I go to a 900 cap room, I might see, hopefully, pray to God, 3 or 4 security guards. But I think having like volunteers gives it so much more of a presence from staff. And I think just creates more an environment for fans feel safe going to shows. For the venues out there that might be like listening to this, is this something that any venue can do, or what are the parameters to being able to have volunteers?
So it's a fine line with who you end up getting to volunteer, but I think having a really great volunteer coordinator, having someone, I mean, we were blessed with having Tony Iaquinto for years. I know he just retired, but such an amazing man, very patient. I think having someone who can dedicate their times to the needs of the volunteers and to make sure they're on the same page, that's a big part of it. But if you find yourself to be able to have that time, it's great too. I tried to interact and engage and hang out with the volunteers as much as possible because I felt that was important. But the whole idea is, if you have a volunteer program and you treat them well and you make them feel, again, like your house is their house and they're very much just as responsible as someone walking in their house, that they take pride in it. And they're the one, I mean, the volunteers are the ones that are going out shopping and going to restaurants, still wearing their St. Augustine Amphitheater volunteer shirts because they're so passionate. They want to talk about it with people. They want to talk like, yeah, I volunteer at the amphitheater. Some of the craziest things have come out of the volunteers' mouths as far as like who's coming and how artists are and this or that. And it's like, at the end of the day, they can say whatever they want. They feel such a passion and love for it. But I think that's the whole thing, is you get them to fall in love with the venue and what you're doing. And, we would have volunteer appreciation parties every year. We would treat them, we have reward programs or things we would constantly try to do to kind of maintain a solid base of dedicated volunteers. And there's a core of like a few dozen, like just badass ultimate men and women who are just like, they would work harder than some of the staff. They were just there. They were there, like, and they cared about it. But yeah, you really gotta take care of them, and you gotta make them feel like what you're working towards is something they believe in. You know, I've talked to people who volunteer at other places, and they just volunteer there, and they're like, you know, we don't like the people that work there. We don't know what they're doing. It's a joy coming to St. Augustine because we feel like we get to understand what you're trying to do with this place.
Yeah.
And again, it's a community. I mean, if you're just a random large venue in the middle of a city or in the middle of a market and you have no real community outreach other than saying, hey, we'd love for people to volunteer here. It's like, what's the point? I don't know what you get out of it. If the venue you have is not going out into the community and expecting the community to come back into the venue, like it's a two-way street. That's a big piece. I mean, for me, that's why working with local businesses, working with nonprofits, making those connections, I would want to be in the community as much as possible, because if I'm going to expect for the community to give a shit and defend the amphitheater and get behind the amphitheater and my vision, I better be out there working for them and what they believe in as well.
Yeah, that's such a good lesson for anyone, I think, as a venue that's listening to this. It's important to have a community aspect along with your venue, regardless if it's a 300-person club or a 4,000 seat amphitheater. I think that's a really important piece that a lot of venues miss, because in a way you're setting like a foundation of the culture for that city by the types of artists that you're bringing in. So you're cultivating culture, and you want the local business to support you, and in return you want to support the local businesses. You want to encourage your fans and your audiences to go to their restaurants and to their bars and engage with local community events. I think that is such an important role or part of running a venue.
Yeah.
At both venues, you also worked a lot with partners, like outside promoters, like Live Nation, AEG, and even independent promoters. Why is that important as a venue to work with outside promoters?
So it's a fundamental principle in how we're going to operate in Huntsville and how we operate as the venue group as well. There's there's a race towards domination in markets and venues, and it doesn't really behoove anyone to kind of win that. And so for us, not only does it speak, I would never want to limit myself to being able to get an artist that I feel is awesome at the amphitheater. And if all of a sudden I was saying, we don't work with Live Nation anymore, they go, well, that's too bad, because this Black Keys tour we have coming through or whatever, it's a Live Nation tour. Mm-hmm. And so they're just you're not even on their radar. You're not even on their radar. So much of what we did in St. Augustine was make sure that the artists and the artist management were going, we want to play St. Augustine. If they're putting their East Coast route together, we're going to play DC, we're going to play Atlanta, we're playing St. Augustine, we're playing Orlando, we're playing New Orleans. Like, we're just on this list. We know we're locked in. The agent calls me direct, said, hey, we're playing. And then at that point, I'm like, I don't really care who promotes it. I want the artist to know that they're playing St. Augustine. We know that they're playing. So it didn't really, I try to respect history as much as possible. I know it's hard with a lot of the independent promoters who feel they were doing a show for someone when they were only playing to 200 people, and then all of a sudden they blow up and they're playing to 4,000 people and they kind of get cut out of that. I always like to make sure that we're paying attention to that, because a lot of times it's not even that it's getting bulldozed, it's more just forgotten about. Or it's like, sometimes we operate on a bigger level and we forget that the guys who are booking some random country artists and letting them sleep on their couch 1 year, 2 years later, when they're playing 4,000, 8,000, 10,000 seats, that person should get a little piece of it, or at least be there as a tip of the hat to acknowledge. So just trying to balance that ecosystem, I think it's important. I would never want to limit. I would never want, and again, being a neutral party, very important. I have friends who work in all aspects of all the businesses. I know great people that work at Live Nation, great people at AEG. Like, some of my favorite people are working, in this industry, and I want to continue to work with them. It doesn't make sense to me when a venue comes out of the gate announcing that they're primarily exclusively booking with one entity or another, especially if they're not owned by that entity.
Right.
And it seems lazy to me, to be
Yeah.
honest. But again, I think I felt that I was ambitious enough out of the gate to where, I mean, we did a lot of stuff in-house, you know, we did, especially in Ponte Vedra or the Backyard or some of the shows at the Amphitheater, even, it's like, I was the promoter. So that just kind of carried over to like, I like curating. And if you're leaving it as open as possible, you get the ability to curate, you don't limit yourself. You can genuinely look at the community and say, hey, don't worry, no matter what your favorite artist, we have this room that's available that if they can fill it, or if they, you know, it's like we have rooms to where we can put your favorite artist. If you go to someone in the community and say, we'd love to book this great band that you all love, but we can't because, you know, we only exclusively book with Live Nation, and they, you know, it's like that's
you're in community with that.
Yeah, and the community goes, what are you even talking about? I don't even know what that means. Like, just book the band.
Right, yeah, exactly. And it's another great example of, you know, how about being selfless and just being able to partner with other people, partner with the community, partner with other promoters. And I think at the end, of people that have that kind of mindset, like in the long run, like I always think about the long game. Like, don't think just about the next 4 or 5 years, but as you're already talking about the Huntsville Amphitheater, you're talking about 10 to 15, 20 years. And that's, I think, the kind of mindset you have to have that kind of longevity and that kind of success and support that you guys had at St. Augustine, which I'm sure you're going to have that in Huntsville also. So it's really awesome to have that kind of mindset. It's inspiring.
Well, yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I think there's such short-sightedness, and I think to see everybody at the table talking right now in our industry to how we get up from this, how do we pick ourselves up, I think we could have avoided a lot of it if we didn't have such short-sighted, like I said, race to the finish. And it's like you're rushing towards failure, no matter, I mean, if you're the biggest dog in the playground, it doesn't matter if all the other dogs are gone, or whatever analogy you want to use. But it's just one of those things where it's like, so to go back to St. Augustine was interesting because I had the short-sightedness of local government sometimes being imposed, or at least suggested, and then the short-sightedness of some of the music industry elements of what's hot, what's not, you know, how to approach things, like whether it be like, naming rights, like any kind of those kind of things. It's like you're short-sighted when you sell your building for $1 million to name it the Dunkin' Donuts Amphitheater or 1-800-ASK-GARY Amphitheater. You know, so those are some examples of like trying to get some revenue that's short-sighted. Not to kind of beat that drum too hard, but yeah, so I think you got to look. I mean, 10, 20 years from now, we don't know who's going to give a shit about what bands or what music looks like, but I think we at least need to pick our heads up, you know, long enough. There's bands that were touring 10 years ago that are as hot as ever right now, and we wouldn't have thought that 10 years ago, so you have no idea. No idea.
Absolutely, yeah. So we're quickly running out of time, and we could probably do a whole nother podcast just on the Green Hands project.
I can go like 10, 15 more minutes tops, but yeah, totally up to you.
Okay, cool. Well, in that case, then, was that?
This can be part one.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, one of the other things I was going to ask you about is Sing Out Loud Festival, Green Hands project, venues having a sustainability project. So maybe that could be a preview for part 2, because I feel like we can easily go another hour just on those topics alone. So let me throw in a few quick fun questions. And before I ask those, what advice would you give to someone that is like new in the industry, that's looking to get into maybe promoting concerts or working for a venue, or just trying to figure out like their direction of where to go in the music business?
I think it goes back to one of our first questions, which is find the people that inspire you and kind of are leading the way in the way you feel things should be done, or is exciting and compelling to you. So I think for me, the ability to reach out to some of the venue operators or promoters, local, national, whatever, artist management agents. Sure, out of every 10 emails you send, 8 won't write back. But at the same time, the more you're kind of reaching out to people and kind of putting yourself out there and trying to align yourself in the right way, I feel like I've gotten really lucky in a lot of ways. I've gotten a lot of lucky breaks per se, but I think that does myself a disservice to where it's like I worked really hard to continue to align myself with people that I believe in and are working on things that are similar to what I believe in. So I think there's some longevity in that. And I think if you can find, especially in the community, if you find some really great spaces and venues and parts of the industry that are great, or elsewhere, move to a community that really inspires you. I mean, I think just the people that are forward thinking and the people that have really kind of kept their eyes on the long-term things are the ones that are going to be okay through this, you know? So I think it really changes. There's some monumental changes happening on such a grand level in our industry, but a lot of the undercurrent is going to be okay. Because I think there's, again, going back to, if I was in St. Augustine right now, it's like I know I'd be leaning pretty hard to make sure the community understood that we were going to be okay and we'd be here when we all return from this. And but if there was a sense that, oh man, we're not going to be okay, I would be able to turn to the community and say, hey, I need you to fight for me. As much as I fight for you, I need you to fight for me now. And that's what you want to build. And it's being in Huntsville, it's like I've really started working with the local music community before we've even built the whole point of moving here, years before this place even opens, is that I really wanted to get to know the Huntsville music community. I wanted to get to know the local musicians, the people who are doing great stuff. And already I've been asked to be part of some great initiatives, and the Women in Music Festival has me involved this year. And it's just like a pretty phenomenal, all women focused like festival here in Huntsville. That's just like mind blowing with what they do. But I feel like that's the shit that inspires me. By the time we open the amphitheater, we're doing shows, it's great. I mean, that's going to happen. But I think, so I think find the people that inspire you and try to reach out to them and learn from them, and opportunities open up. You never know. It's going to take one conversation that could change your life forever, you know?
Yeah, that's such great advice. Another thing to go along with that, Jim Maloney was on the podcast, and he talked about that. And one of the ways to succeed is trying to be able to do the job of 2 or 3 different people. So you're wearing many hats because it makes you more valuable because you can do so many different things. However, sometimes you are in a scenario where you just can't do that. You're held back by the organization you work for because there's a ton of roadblocks in the way, or too much red tape on who can do what and can't do something. What advice would you give to a person that's finds themselves in that kind of a scenario, that's hungry and wants to continue to grow in their career?
Well, because I know Jim's not listening to this or won't watch this. Well, I'll say that I did 2 or 3 jobs on behalf of Jim Maloney anytime I was working with him. So I understand what he's saying. Jim's one of my favorite people that I ever worked with, and he was such an amazing dude, and is an amazing dude. And he's right. And that's the thing that I forget. I think I have been doing the job of like 8 people, and I'm not saying that as far as like I'm not doing any of them fully or well. I'm just like I try to like obsessively try to reach, and I want to be the talent buyer and the promoter and the GM, and I want to all of a sudden step in and be director of marketing, and I want to burst into the box office, and so you got to trust your people at the end of the day. But I think so. There's a woman I know. I don't know if you know her, Roxanne, who lives in Tampa, and she works for Straz currently. And she reached out to me with a kind of a similar question. She said, there's some old guard here that I work with that I don't know would be as open to some of the ideas I have. And what advice would you give me? And I was like, you got to put yourself out there. Again, it goes back to find the person that you feel you can actually sit down with and connect. And it, at the end of the day, is going to be able to let you kind of give you a little bit of rope, and kind of give you the ability to take some risks. And I did a lot of work on the front end of getting not only the industry to trust me in St. Augustine to do a show, but the county. I had a lot of bureaucracy to wade through to go, hey, county commissioners, county attorneys, county administrator, you have to trust me. And the only way you're going to trust me is if you let me do this and prove myself again and again and again and again. So to work pretty hard through that. But if you're stuck and you kind of see these obstacles, try to find the person in the organization that can help you work through those obstacles. You know, I think you never know. You never know. I mean, I think you'd be blown away. I've had some preconceived notions of the way people operate at other venues, and I've kind of criticized the way people have ran certain things until I actually sat and talked with them. And sometimes it's because they're kind of handcuffed, but also times it's like some things have never occurred to them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just that they are somehow operating in a way that is disagreeable to me. And I'm like, how can they not clearly see X, Y, and Z until I've sat down and go, why don't you do this? And they go, wow, Ryan, I've actually never thought about that. Or do you have any advice of how we would do this? And I go, yeah, do this or do this. And they go, wow, we've never thought about that. So it's interesting. A lot of times when you perceive some of these, you get calloused into thinking that people are kind of blocking you, but or there's some obstacles. Sometimes you just got to work through.
Yeah, I love that. That's really good advice. Thanks for that. So a few quick little rapid fire questions. Who are some of your past and current mentors?
I don't know. It's funny. I think I don't see, in the past, I had a lot of people who, I don't know. I think from we're operating in a really cool, righteous, like punk rock art level that had like transformed art and music and done really great things, like Ian MacKaye in DC running Discord Records and, you know, being in Fugazi and all the things he's done. I mean, there's the very obvious ones like that for me. And then, but in our industry, it's not just that I have mentors, I have peers who really inspire me. I feel really lucky currently. My team is incredible. Ben Lovett, who's my partner in all this, and CEO of Venue Group. I mean, he's just not only a phenomenal musician and human, but a great person to work with. And I'm able to stand tall next to him and feel like we've aligned ourselves correctly. And Mike Luba, another absolute legend in our business, and Don Sullivan, and people who have, I mean, are my partners in this venture that, yeah, and Graham Brown, who I work with, and he's in Austin, Texas, and all of us as a team, I feel like, yeah, I don't really have mentors as much as I have peers who inspire me, and I just feel really lucky to look around the room and go, holy shit, I can't believe I get to work with these people. This is a really great situation.
That's awesome. That's really cool. What is something that you're currently really interested in learning, or a skill that you're trying to get better at? It doesn't have to be music or business related at all, or it can be.
Yeah, it's probably not music related. Well, currently, because of just the necessity, and also because my wife Lauren is smarter than me when it comes to understanding how the world is gonna evolve, we've turned our backyard into a full-blown permaculture garden. And
Nice.
recently, a few weeks ago, went and got chickens, and I built a chicken coop and a chicken run, and right outside these windows is and actually, let me show you why it's so bright in here, is because we actually have a ton of seedlings growing.
Oh,
And
wow. Awesome.
that are going to be transplanted at some point. And so yeah, this is a grow room / workspace. Yeah, we have, and it's all like amazing heirloom native like crops, and, you know, Tennessee red cob corn and beans and kale. And but yeah, so I'm trying to learn a lot about homesteading and being able to eat the food that you're growing in your backyard. I mean, it's not that radical of an idea. I mean, I heard like 45% of someone's food sources used to be from their own backyard, you know? So at a time like these where you can't leave the house, or you're trying to get groceries delivered, it feels good to know, like, we've already eaten from the garden twice today, you know? So
That's awesome.
yeah. So I think, you know, like, I'm trying to read a lot, trying to spend some of this time getting smarter when it comes to some things. I think it's really interesting. I think we all got to brace ourselves for what's coming in our industry, and how we adapt and how we kind of all rise to the occasion. So, yeah, a lot of time spent thinking about that, you know?
Mhm. No, I love that. I love might have to hit you up when I have my own place, because that's the goal here. When I have my own garden and eat out of my own backyard.
Easy, man. It seems so intimidating, but it's probably the easiest thing. It's yeah. Once you get rolling, it's yeah. We can't keep up with the amount of food we're growing. So at some point, we're going to be putting together baskets of eggs and kale and greens and beans to like deliver to the neighbors and stuff. You know. So
That's awesome. I love it. What was your first concert and the first album you ever bought?
first concert. My dad disputes this because I was going to concerts in the womb, but the first concert I clearly remember was in Gainesville when my dad, I was 5, and so it would have been 1981, and my dad was going to UF, so it was on the plaza of the UF, and it was to see Devo. And I remember it clearly because my dad took a flower pot, like a plastic red flower pot, and emptied it out and let me wear it on my head as part of like the Devo getup. And so I have a great memory of that. I think, there was some early, my dad had got me records here and there, but I remember the first, it wasn't vinyl record I got, which I have like rooms full of now, but the first like long box CD I went and bought with my own money. It was 9 Inch Nails, Pretty Hate Machine. I remember going to, I think it was Specs in Daytona and buying that. That was kind of a big deal. There was that, and like at the time it was like Jane's Addiction, Nothing Shocking, Pretty Hate Machine, some Primus records. There was a whole string of that early 90s like really great alternative rock that kind of broke it open, and yeah, all downhill from there. I still love that 9 Inch Nails record. That still holds up. And the Jane's Addiction actually still holds up.
That's good ones. I love it.
Yeah.
What are the books, documentaries, or podcasts you share the most?
Oof. A lot of the books I'm reading, Michael Pollan, who he did that Cooked documentary on Netflix, which is worth watching. He's written Omnivore's Dilemma, The Botany of Desire. He just did an audiobook on caffeine. He is an amazing mind. He wrote a book recently on like mushrooms and psychedelics as well, but his take on history and food and the world and sociology and anthropology is just unlike others, and I love it. There's a guy called John T. Edge who he wrote a book called what is it called? The Potlickers. I forget the name, but John T. Edge. So he's part of the Bitter Southerner. BitterSoutherner.com is a great website and an amazing podcast that talks about the complexities of the South, the good, the bad, the ugly, food, art, culture. It's pretty amazing. And then Lauren and I just binged on the Dolly Parton's America podcast. We went over to Gatlinburg before this all went down. We got to go over to Gatlinburg for a little family trip, and we really submersed ourselves in the world of Dolly Parton, and I'm convinced she's unearthly. She's from another planet. She not only just gave $1 million to help research this coronavirus, but she's reading bedtime books on her Imagination Library YouTube page and for kids. So last night, Dolly Parton read a book to my kids before they went to sleep. So
Awesome.
I'm a big fan of Dolly Parton right now.
Love it.
I know it's fun. Yeah.
So a couple more industry questions. What is the most common bad advice you hear people in our industry give?
There's a ton. I think that the one early on that I kind of rejected, that I still reject, is that you got to be a hard ass, or you got to be, and I think something you and I talked about, the idea that you have to be an asshole. And I feel in our industry, and in almost every industry, especially to be a woman and I feel there's this pressure you just got to be an asshole to get shit done. And for men, it's across genders, but it's this like, the more of an asshole, the more intimidating, the more you just burst in the room and kind of like, what the fuck is, the more the tour managers that do that, the artist management, the artists who act like that, the promoters who do that, the venue management, it's like, it's just, it's a bunch of bullshit. It's a bunch of posturing, and it's a bunch of, I never understood that. And the people who act like that, they're carrying shit with them that has nothing to do with why they're acting like that in that moment. And it's just some miserable people kind of set that in motion. And yeah, some of the biggest, like, lamest personalities in our industry have started to wither away. It's kind of like an old
Yeah.
school way of thinking.
Thankfully.
And yeah, some of the most compassionate and just like wild, wacky, just open, progressive, like cool people in our industry they're outlasting, you know, because they've treated people right. I never understood this, like, you got to be an asshole to get shit done, or you got to be an asshole or the people are going to take advantage of you. I never got that. You know, I've never in my life felt like I've walked away from a situation and thought that someone took advantage of me in a way that just wasn't right, you know. I mean, maybe when I was a kid in middle school, but ever since then, it's just like, you know, I think I'm gonna take the high road. I think there's something to that. I don't think if anyone tells you you gotta own the room or you gotta be an asshole, I don't think it. I think it burns out. Again, that's a short-sighted thing. I don't think you foster relationships with people or venues or artists or communities by being an asshole. No one goes, man, that guy's an asshole. Love working with him.
Yeah.
Man, that's it doesn't make sense to me.
I love that. That's such good advice, and you're definitely lead by example. Of like working again, everything you said so far in the podcast, like the importance of community and being a partner and being open-minded and listening to people. I think that makes a big difference, and people want to work with people like that, which is why I feel like you're where you're at. I mean, you've done a lot of amazing things, and I think it's because of a mindset like that.
Thanks.
And so that kind of answered both my questions. So before I ask you the last question, kind of just echo to what I said. Just want to thank you for your time of coming on the podcast and sharing your lessons and wisdom and your story. And there's so much more that I would love to unpack. So if round 2 will be an option, that'd be awesome to do down the road.
Yeah, I do think on that note, a lot to talk about with like Sing Out Loud and Green Hands and the things that are fun, like cool things that happen in St. Augustine that I think are a cool carryover here in Huntsville. And so yeah, let's do this again.
Yeah, I'd love to. What's the best way to get people to connect with you or learn about what it is you guys are doing?
So for me, just looking at HuntsvilleAmphitheater.com, you can specifically see there's kind of just a simple page up right now that's going to be talking about, we're going to be working on that. It's just ryan.murphy@venuegroup.com. If you go to venuegroup.com, again, kind of just a brief overview of what we're working. We're doing a ton on the back end to develop a ton of projects, and we're going to get a little more robust with the forward-facing nature of that. But yeah, I mean, I'm open to people get a hold of me via Instagram, Facebook, email, whatever. And yeah, I'm happy to talk to anyone and everyone.
I'll share all that in the show notes as always, along with everything else we talked about. And the question asked at the end is, what's your definition of making it?
The definition of making it for me is no matter what you're faced with, standing up for what you believe in. I think at the end of the day, aligning yourself with the people to be able to stand there, and you're going to have to weather some gnarly shit to get to the point where you feel like it's all been worth it. But I think to be able to look around and to go back to that question we talked about, looking up to people, I feel like to be able to look to my sides, and this has been this way for a little while for me now. I look around the room and I'm so inspired, and I feel so grateful to have found such great people to work with on so many different things and so many different aspects of my life that I feel like that's making it. But I only got here and I only found the people that I'm surrounded by because I kind of just continued to stand up for what I believe in, whether or not anyone else in the room at times agreed. I think that's a really hard thing to get through. And I think you will find the people that believe in you and believe in the things that you believe in, and you're going to believe in those people, and it's going to create a great community. And I think if you can get a community of people, I think I'm lucky, again, going back to my punk rock roots of like having a very strong sense of community and taking care of each other and looking out for each other. It's just, you gotta be there for people when they need you, and they'll be there for you.